The sun cast a golden hue over the city streets that morning, but beneath its warm light stirred the quiet tension of something far greater. At the center of it stood Arthur Bennett, a man not seeking attention nor fame, but justice. At 76, years old with snow-white hair and deep lines etched into his face from years of struggle, Arthur carried with him only a simple homemade sign that read, "Fair housing for all." He moved slowly but deliberately, each step steady as he approached the front steps of City Hall. Around him gathered a small group of protesters, single mothers who had been evicted, young students drowning in debt, war veterans living out of their cars. They all stood in silent solidarity, united by a shared pain inflicted by rising rents, corrupt landlords, and indifferent city officials. For Arthur, this was personal. His daughter Emily and his 2 young grandchildren had been evicted months earlier, victims of a predatory landlord who tripled the rent overnight. Despite his age and limited resources, Arthur had taken them into his tiny home. But the injustice gnawed at him. Today wasn't just another demonstration, it was his stand. As the morning crowd grew, so did the unease across the street, where a row of mounted police officers sat astride their massive horses, helmets gleaming under the sun. Their orders were clear: prevent unrest, disperse if necessary, maintain control. Arthur raised his voice gently, addressing the crowd with quiet strength. We are here for those without a voice, for the mothers, the children, the veterans forgotten. By those sworn to serve us, we demand only fairness. We will not be silenced. Cheers and supportive claps filled the air. The protest remained peaceful, as it always had been, yet tension thickened like a storm cloud. The police chief, watching from a nearby command post, spoke sharply into his radio. If they don't disperse soon, move them out. Minutes later, a booming voice echoed from a bullhorn. This is an unlawful assembly. Disperse immediately, or face arrest. Arthur's face stayed calm. He raised his sign a little higher, his hands trembling not with fear, but with conviction. Officer, Arthur called back, his voice still respectful but firm. We have the constitutional right to assemble. We are peaceful. The officer on horseback narrowed his eyes and tugged at the reins. The horse jerked forward. Shouts of fear rippled through the crowd as people backed away. Some stumbled, others clutched their loved ones. Still, Arthur stood his ground. He'd seen worse in his long life. He had marched decades earlier for civil rights. He knew the cost of silence. Suddenly, one officer lost control. His horse lunged forward aggressively. The massive animal's chest collided with Arthur, knocking the elderly man off balance. His cane clattered to the pavement as he fell backward. Hitting the ground hard, a chorus of gasps rose from the onlookers. But the nightmare had only begun. The officer dismounted, grabbed Arthur roughly by the arm, and began dragging him across the rough concrete. His frail body left a trail of blood where the skin tore on the unforgiving ground. His sign was trampled beneath the hooves of the horses. "Stop! You're hurting him!" Emily screamed from the crowd, trying to rush forward, but held back by another officer. The entire horrifying scene was captured on dozens of phones. The footage spread online within minutes, spreading like wildfire across social media. Hashtags emerged instantly: Justice for Arthur, Police Brutality, Elderly Rights. As paramedics arrived and carefully lifted Arthur onto a stretcher, his battered face barely recognizable, the peaceful protest had transformed into a horrifying symbol of unchecked authority. But what no one realized yet was that this tragedy would spark a fight for justice that would shake the entire nation. The first spark had been struck. The rhythmic beep of hospital monitors echoed through the sterile room as Arthur Bennett slowly opened his eyes. The sharp fluorescent light stung his vision. Every movement sent pain shooting through his ribs, and his left arm throbbed where the officer had twisted it. His face felt swollen and heavy, his lips dry and cracked. The memory of the officer dragging him flashed behind his eyes like a nightmare he couldn't escape. Beside him sat his daughter, Emily, her hands tightly gripping his. Her face was pale, streaked with tears, but her voice was calm and steady. As she whispered, "Dad, you're safe now, you're in the hospital." Arthur tried to smile, but the movement only worsened the pain. "Emily," The protest. What happened? Her lips quivered, and she shook her head. They attacked you, Dad. You didn't do anything wrong, but the whole world saw it. She glanced toward the television mounted on the wall, where the footage was playing on repeat. Arthur, a fragile elderly man, being knocked down, dragged, and bloodied on the cold pavement while officers stood by. The clip had gone viral. Major news networks picked it up within hours. Social media was ablaze. Strangers from across the country and even the world voiced their outrage, flooding timelines with hashtags demanding justice. Justice for Arthur, this elderly man abused. End police brutality. Outside the hospital, crowds began to gather. What started as a few concerned citizens quickly swelled into hundreds, then thousands. Protesters held candles, signs, and pictures of Arthur, chanting his name. Meanwhile, City Hall was in full crisis mode. Mayor Caldwell sat in his office, his face pale as reporters camped outside demanded answers. "This is a disaster," he snapped, slamming his fist on the desk. "That officer should have used better judgment. Now the entire nation is watching." The police chief shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "We're preparing a statement. We'll call it an unfortunate accident during crowd control. Arthur resisted arrest." The mayor glared. "Have you seen the footage? No one believes that. We need a scapegoat." By that evening, the department announced that Officer Derek Slater, the man who dragged Arthur, had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. But the weak response only fueled more outrage. On every major channel, legal, experts, activists, and politicians argued passionately. "This is not just an isolated incident," said one commentator. "This is systemic. If a peaceful elderly protester can be brutalized like this, who is safe?" In the hospital room, Emily's phone buzzed non-stop with calls from journalists, lawyers, and strangers offering support. But she focused only on her father. "You didn't deserve this," she whispered again, tears sliding down her cheeks. Arthur gently squeezed her hand, his voice raspy but firm. "Sometimes the world needs to see how ugly things really are before they change." Just as Emily wiped her eyes, her phone buzzed again, this time with a message from an anonymous number. She opened it cautiously. It contained a single video clip. It was body cam footage. The video showed Officer Slater clearly. His voice was cold and deliberate. "Teach the old man a lesson. Let them see what happens when they defy us." Emily's heart stopped. The city had tried to cover it up. The police claimed Arthur had resisted arrest, but this footage told a different story. A premeditated attack designed to intimidate peaceful protesters. She showed the video to Arthur, who, despite his pain, managed to nod slowly. "They won't be able to hide now," Emily said, her voice burning with determination. As night fell over the hospital, the video leaked online. Within minutes, the internet exploded again. News anchors broke their programming for breaking news. The evidence was irrefutable, and the city's lies were exposed. The peaceful protest had turned into a nightmare, but now the battle for justice had begun. The leaked body cam footage was like gasoline poured onto an already raging fire. News networks interrupted their regular broadcasts. The footage of Officer Slater's cruel words, "Teach the old man a lesson," was played again and again, each time igniting fresh waves of public fury. Overnight, Arthur Bennett's name became a household symbol of injustice. The protests outside the hospital grew larger by the hour. What had started as a local rally had transformed into a full-blown national movement. People of every background flooded the streets, not just in Arthur's city but across the country. Candlelight vigils, marches, and sit-ins popped up in dozens of cities. Some held signs that read, "I am Arthur. No justice, no peace. Our elders deserve respect." Social media was consumed by the story. Millions posted under the hashtags "Action Justice for Arthur" and "Action Stop the Violence." Celebrities, athletes, and even some politicians joined the chorus, demanding accountability and systemic change. Arthur's image, battered but dignified, became an icon overnight. In the hospital, Arthur watched in quiet disbelief from his bed, his daughter Emily by his side. "They're all here because of you, Dad," she whispered. You've woken up the world." Arthur shook his head gently. "They're not here because of me, sweetheart. They're here because they're tired of the lies. I'm just one more person who was hurt." But Emily saw something more. She saw a man who had become the face of courage, a man who refused to be broken in the face of cruelty. Inside City Hall, the walls were closing in. Mayor Caldwell sat behind his desk, his face pale and drawn. His political advisers spoke over one another in frantic tones. "We have to fire the officer immediately. No, we need to protect the department. If we don't act, we'll lose the election." Public trust was evaporating by the second. The city's response had been slow and tone-deaf. Now they were drowning in the consequences. The mayor slammed his fist on the table. "Fine, suspend him, open an investigation, make it public." The next morning, the city's official statement was released. Officer Derek Slater had been terminated from the police force pending criminal investigation. The mayor promised full transparency and a commitment to justice. But it was too little, too late. The public wasn't satisfied with empty promises. They wanted real accountability, not only for Officer Slater, but for the system that allowed it to happen. That same day, Emily received a phone call from a man named Marcus Harlan, a nationally recognized civil rights attorney known for taking on powerful institutions. His voice was calm but carried a quiet force. "Ms. Bennett, first let me say how deeply sorry I am for what your father has endured. What happened to him is not just tragic, it's criminal. I believe we have a chance here, not just for compensation, for real justice." Emily listened carefully as Marcus continued. "The city will fight back hard. They'll try to paint your father as difficult or reckless, but with the video evidence, with the body cam footage, they can't hide anymore. We can file a civil rights lawsuit, expose the cover-up, and force real reform." She glanced at her father, who was resting, his face still bruised but his spirit unbroken. "Mr. Harlan, we don't want a payout. We want them held accountable, all of them." Marcus smiled through the phone. "That's exactly what I intend to do." As Marcus assembled his legal team, the pressure on the city intensified. The Department of Justice announced they were launching a federal investigation into the police department's practices. Civil rights groups descended on the city, organizing legal support and protest logistics. Former officers, emboldened by the public outcry, began coming forward with stories of internal corruption, quotas, and a culture of silence inside the department. One anonymous officer told reporters, "We were ordered to crack down on protesters. Make examples of them," they said. Arthur wasn't supposed to be hurt that bad, but we were told to send a message. The city's dirty secrets were unraveling faster than anyone could contain them. One evening, as Emily sat beside her father, she whispered, "You were right, Dad. You standing your ground." It made them listen. Arthur opened his eyes and gave a faint smile. "No one should have to suffer to be heard. But if my pain helps change things, and then maybe it's worth it." The world was watching. The real battle was about to begin. The courtroom was packed, every seat was taken, with hundreds more gathered outside, their eyes glued to the large television screens broadcasting the proceedings. The trial of Bennett versus City of Brooksville had become the nation's most watched event, a symbol of accountability long overdue. Arthur Bennett sat in a wheelchair near the front, his face pale but composed. His daughter Emily sat beside him, her hand resting firmly on his. She could feel the trembling in his fingers, but also the quiet strength behind them. Marcus Harlan stood tall at the plaintiff's table. His calm gaze swept across the courtroom, landing briefly on the defense attorneys who looked equally nervous and determined. The city had spared no expense bringing in their best legal team, but Marcus was prepared. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Marcus began in his opening statement, his voice firm but respectful. "This case isn't just about one man. It's about the system that allowed what happened to Mr. Bennett to occur and then tried to cover it up." He paused, letting the weight of his words hang in the air. "This is about accountability." The defense followed with their carefully rehearsed narrative that the officers were under extreme pressure, that Arthur had failed to comply with lawful orders, and that the incident was a tragic accident. Not intentional cruelty, but the public had already seen the footage, and now they would see much more. Over the following days, Marcus systematically dismantled the defense's arguments. First came the videos, the smartphone footage, the body cam leak, and new surveillance videos from nearby buildings, all clearly showing Arthur standing peacefully before being assaulted. Then came the witnesses. One by one, fellow protesters took the stand. A young mother, her voice shaking, described watching Arthur get knocked to the ground. He never raised his voice. He didn't fight. He just stood there. And they hurt him anyway. Next, a former officer, one of the department's own, delivered one of the trial's most explosive moments. We were ordered to clear the crowd, to make examples of protesters like Mr. Bennett, he confessed. We knew it wasn't right, but we were told this came from higher up, pressure from City Hall. Gasps filled the courtroom. Emails, text messages, and internal memos revealed a chilling chain of command. Not only was Officer Slater acting aggressively, but senior officials had authorized the crackdown. The so-called accident was part of a larger effort to intimidate protesters and suppress dissent. The defense tried to counter with technicalities, questioning procedures and attempting to shift blame back onto Arthur. But with every passing hour, their arguments grew weaker. Arthur, too frail to testify for long, spoke briefly on the third day. He was wheeled up to the witness stand, the room falling silent. My only weapon that day was my voice. And a cardboard sign, Arthur said softly, his voice cracking but steady. I stood there for my daughter, for my grandchildren, for the families who've lost their homes, and for that, I was treated like a criminal. He looked at the bar. Jury, his eyes glistening. I've seen injustice before, but I never thought, in my old age, I'd be dragged like an animal in front of my own neighbors. And I pray none of you, none of your families ever know that pain. There wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. In closing, Marcus stood tall before the jury. Arthur Bennett stood for what was right. They tried to silence him. They tried to shame him. And when that failed, they tried to destroy him. But the truth has a way of rising, even when the powerful conspire to bury it. He pointed toward the city officials sitting coldly behind the defense table. This isn't just about a rogue officer. This is about corruption, cruelty, and abuse of power. If we allow this to continue, what message do we send? That the weak don't matter. That the old can be trampled. That justice is optional? He paused, lowering his voice. Not today, not in this courtroom. The jury deliberated for just 5 hours. When they returned, the courtroom held its collective breath. The foreman stood. We find in favor of Mr. Bennett and the plaintiffs. On all counts. Arthur closed his eyes and Emily gripped his hand, tears streaming down her cheeks. A wave of applause and sobs rippled through the courtroom. Outside, crowds erupted in cheers as the verdict was announced. Justice had spoken, but the fight was not over yet. The verdict triggered sweeping investigations and a storm that would soon reach every corner of the city's power structure. The courtroom verdict rippled far beyond the walls of justice. The moment the jury declared the city guilty on all counts, the media seized the story with renewed force. Overnight, the Bennett case became a national reckoning, a symbol of corruption, exposed and accountability demanded. But inside City Hall, panic set in. Emails were subpoenaed. Internal documents leaked. Whistleblowers, no longer fearful after seeing Arthur's victory, stepped forward one by one. They exposed a toxic web that extended far beyond Officer Slater. Mayor Caldwell, once confident he could ride out the storm, now faced public outrage that grew with every headline. The mayor's chief of staff, under federal investigation, finally cracked. In a tearful interview broadcast live, she revealed, the mayor ordered aggressive enforcement to suppress the protests. We were told to make examples of certain individuals, and Arthur Bennett was one of them. They wanted fear, they wanted silence. The city's residents, who had trusted their elected leaders, were stunned. The mayor's office, the police department, even the district attorney's office, all implicated in a coordinated effort to crush peaceful dissent. The cover-up ran deep. As the truth unfolded, Arthur watched from his hospital room. Though his body remained weak, his spirit was strong. Emily sat by his side, reading the breaking news aloud while holding his hand. "They're falling, Dad," she whispered, emotion choking her voice. "All of them, one by one." Arthur nodded. Gently, his voice raspy but steady. "It was never just about me, Emily. They hurt so many others before me. Maybe now, finally, they'll be seen too." Federal indictments followed. The mayor was arrested on charges of conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and abuse of power. The police chief was removed and criminally charged. Several senior officers were dismissed and prosecuted. Reforms swept through the city like a tidal wave. A new independent civilian oversight board was established to monitor the police department. Sweeping legislation banning aggressive crowd control measures was signed into law. Victims of past abuses came forward, many receiving long overdue justice. What had begun with one man standing silently with a cardboard sign had become a national movement for change. They called it the Bennett Effect. News anchors spoke about it nightly. Journalists penned articles titled "The Protest That Changed America" and "The Elder Who Brought Down a City." Civil rights leaders invoked Arthur's name alongside great figures in the struggle for justice. Even the president addressed it during a national broadcast. Mr. Bennett's courage reminded us all of the sacred responsibility we have to protect the vulnerable and hold the powerful accountable. We must honor his sacrifice with action. But not all victories came from courtrooms or legislation. One evening, several months after the verdict, Emily wheeled Arthur through a peaceful rally held in his honor. Hundreds had gathered, not to protest, but to celebrate. Candles lit the night as people sang softly. Families who had once faced eviction now had stronger tenant protections. Protesters who once feared speaking out now marched freely. Children held up drawings of Arthur holding his famous sign, "Fair Housing for All." At the front of the park stood a newly unveiled memorial, a statue of Arthur, standing with quiet dignity, his simple sign held high. As they reached the statue, the crowd parted, offering space for Arthur to sit before it. Tears filled Emily's eyes as she leaned close. "You did this, Dad. You changed everything." Arthur gazed up at the statue, his voice breaking as he whispered, "I only wanted them to listen." The crowd erupted in applause. His struggle, his pain, his courage, it hadn't been in vain. The truth had come to light. Justice had prevailed, and his simple stand for dignity had become a movement that would live on for generations.